death of George Floyd has brought the issue of racial inequality to the forefront, but many in the Black community say the issue has never gone away. Tonight, we want to have a conversation on how to turn the passion of the rallies into real change. And welcome to a Community Connection conversation on race, pushing for change. Good evening, I'm Danielle Woods. In preparing for this special, we spoke with community leaders, and getting this conversation started on such an important topic is a goal of those we spoke with. So joining us tonight are Chad Dion Lassiter, the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, Greg Carey, who is involved with Power Interfaith of Lancaster County, which promotes equitable education funding, and he has been involved in local demonstrations for racial justice in policing. We also have Sandra Thompson, president of the York NAACP, and Brent Lipscomb, a community activist. And to all of our guests, thank you so much for joining us. And we do encourage discussion and debate and just really open dialogue on this topic. So, of course, there's a lot we want to talk about. Let's start with the protests. They really brought the issues to the forefront. And Brent, I want to start with you because you were very active in the Harrisburg protests. What was that like to be a part of that? And, what were some of the key takeaways from the protest for you?
Very great experience, what I would say. I think protests in general, the objective of them is to state what a problem is. And I think that was accomplished throughout the protests here in the city of Harrisburg. One of the things that we were able to see is there is oppression within communities that actually have a issue with police brutality, that excessive force, and oppression from economic structures that have kept marginalized communities to be at the bottom of the realm for a very, very long time. So we saw a lot of emotions throughout each of the protests and some empowering moments where people of all ethnicities began to come together to express that these communities are being oppressed and they are basically at the bottom of the totem pole, and we need to upbuild these specific communities, especially, and center Black lives specifically, since it's disproportionately represented throughout the criminal justice system.
And I know a conversation that I've heard a lot of people, having is that these protests have felt different from protests in the past. Brent, you're a younger man. I was wondering if maybe someone who has been around in the protests from, generations or decades ago, what kind of differences have you seen? I don't know if Chad or Sandra or Greg, you want to chime in on that one?
I think it's the feeling. I'm not sure if it's the protests themselves, but I think it's that spirit of feeling of change that people are saying now is the time to truly end this, to truly hold governmental bodies, police, business, foundations accountable, to not just put surface statements out there into the community, but to make sustainable change. So that is the feeling that is empowering those who are continuing to protest, as well as placing some, I'm going to say, for lack of fear or that thought of change coming to their business, change coming to their governmental body, change coming to the police departments, the calls to defund or to change the structure of funding in communities to not over police any longer.
I would also add that I think that what was special about this moment, and the reason why I characterize it as special, is because you had humanity on every side of the color line and gender line just simply organizing to say that enough is enough. You had the backdrop of COVID-19. You had 35 million or so individuals who were just prior to COVID were employed. Now they're unemployed. You had people who were situated in a place where, because of social distancing, they had really no choice but to see the horrifying belting out of George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe," calling for his mother, and then emphatically saying that he doesn't want to die. On the heels of what we heard as it pertains to Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and then the trigger of also hearing Eric Garner several years prior to that saying, "I can't breathe." I think this moment is a moment in which structural and systemic racism is front and center, whether that's the Washington Redskins changing their name, whether that's the 1,800 or so racist monuments that have always been racist, that have existed with regards to the Confederacy. And I think this was a moment in which the globe, not saying everyone on the face of the earth, but the globe is speaking back to systems of oppression. And we're oftentimes uncomfortable with having conversations around white violence, white racism, how whiteness protects the mob, but doesn't do anything for those who get mobbed. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's one that the democracy has to have. And so I'm just really encouraged by young people like Brent and multiple others throughout the United States of America and the world who are banding together to simply say, we're not dismissing other lives, but at this pivotal moment, Black lives have been negated and rendered marginalized in our society, and they, in fact, are part of the landscape of American democracy.
Well, it's like there's a critical mass, right? So many incidents, so many videos. And in this case, people didn't just show up on the street once, they showed up for days. They're still showing up. We're showing up in different ways now. And in places, in Elizabethtown and Manheim. And I'm from Florence, Alabama. They had protests there. Those are things that are new to me. And so I hope this momentum, persists in everybody, not just activists, being supportive of change and being specific about change.
Now, Chad, something you touched on, talking about how people around the globe have really, opened their eyes to the issues that are out there right now. But what do you say to someone who says they don't see a problem, they don't see the racial injustice, the racial inequity? What do you say to those folks to kind of get them to see it, from their own perspective?
That's a great question. To be very candid and frank with you, I'm not concerned about those individuals because you're not going to get them. I'm really concerned about individuals who, on every side of the color line and gender line, are saying we need to speak back to systems of oppression and marginalization, whether that be xenophobia towards Asian American Pacific Islanders, whether that's homophobia, transphobia, individuals who come to a context saying, well, they did something, or they don't understand the 401 years of oppression. You're not going to be able to get them to see anything differently. They have to have a moment of self-introspection for themselves. When we look at America in context, for all of the great things that it is, it also is a pillar of contradiction. The first 10 or 12 presidents owned slaves. It doesn't, negate the things that they brought to the democracy, but it shows you those pillars of contradiction. So there are a lot of individuals who are going to always be in denial. Similar to the Colin Kaepernick situation, they blamed him for not wanting to acknowledge the flag, but it was not that he wasn't trying to acknowledge the flag. It was taking a stance for the anthology of police brutality by some police officers. And so people got that convoluted and they switched the narrative. So just in the work that I do, I just really don't have time trying to impress upon those individuals who are in denial that American racism does exist.
I would agree. When you asked that question, the first thing that came to my mind was that word deniers. So whereas we have boycotts, then they say it's cancel culture, to spin it to a negative vein. But I like the title of this program, Pushing for Change, because this is not about cancel culture. To put a negative narrative on what we're doing, we are pushing. So those deniers are that force that we are pushing against. The people who want to maintain the status quo is what we are pushing against. So we have to continue to make that force for change. And the Montgomery bus boycotts was 381 days. But just like Brother Carey has stated, yes, we need to keep this from every community, every day. And what always gets the attention of the community from back in the Children's March, 1963, was the young people. So when the young people start taking control, when the young people start waking up in every area, because who saw the video of the one girl in a predominantly white neighborhood who was marching alone and she was attacked? She had the tenacity to march alone, knowing she was in an unfriendly environment. So we are going to continue the push. So the Washington, formerly the Redskins, changing their names, Aunt Jemima. And what that push is doing is also making the conglomerates change their behavior, but also giving opportunities to Black and brown businesses to start having a place.
Right, yeah, a lot of change is happening and still needs to happen, and we're going to address some more of that coming up in just a few minutes.